Cuba has been changing in many ways for 58 years, and the large-scale transformations promised at the beginning of the process need to be assessed, but not today. We are going to explore the reforms since the end of last year, the reform process. And one of the legacies of Fidel Castro was, and we have three images of Fidel giving instructions, and he lasted a long time. And then Fidel ill, Raúl taking over, and then Fidel died, and post-Fidel dynamics. Very soon we will have post-Raúl dynamics, because he's supposed to step down in 2018. So we'll see what will happen, and Omar is going to be addressing those questions. Many of us in the US, or at least some of us, thought that at some point it became obvious that Cuba had to engage, as Raúl Castro himself mentioned, in a reform process. Legacy of his brother Fidel, the sense of centralized state socialism, which is part of that legacy, central part, and the very strong sense of nationalism directed at the US. So that had to be dealt with, and still does. Well, many of us were expecting to see, as Fidel went through after 2006, through transformation, getting not well, and then passing away, that we would see an impediment to change, major reforms eliminated, and therefore we would see an acceleration. I'm not saying everybody here would agree with that thesis, if some of us did. Well, we are surprised that actually things seems to be stalled in Cuba, the reform process. So the transformation since 2016 has not accelerated, and part of the challenge today is to address that question. Later on, if we have time, I will tell you why the thinking of we expected change faster now, and that has not happened. I'll tell you the reasons. But now we want to change directions, and Miguel, you want to put Omar. Today we want to welcome a very good dear friend. Today marks 20 years of our friendship. Omar Lenny Perez Villanueva, Cuban professor. He was a former director of the Center for the Studies of the Cuban Economy in Cuba, in Havana, at the university. He stopped in that job last year. He's now collaborating with Revista Temas. He's a professor at the University of Havana. He still is, right? Okay. Although, yeah, and he has many other duties. He's really a treat for us to have him on board. He's a critic as well as a commentator, he has seriously engaged the reform process in Cuba, especially since 2008 to 11 with Raúl Castro. So he's going to give us an overview of what things are. He's the main speaker. I want you to be a little patient, those of you who do not speak Spanish. He is English, yeah, he will be using Spanish. However, Mario is going to be translating, right? Yes. At the end of each section, and the slides that he's going to be using are in English. So follow the slides, follow his voice, his Cuban voice, and then Mario is going to be summarizing the main points for all of us. And then if you need to ask clarifying questions, don't do that because it will delay us. So let's wait a bit. But if there are pressing questions, we'll address them. Fair enough? So Omar Lenny Perez Villanueva, welcome to the Billner Center one more time. So shall we welcome him with a nice round of applause? All the way from Havana.
Intentaré en apenas unos 20 o 25 minutos explicarles qué está pasando en Cuba y qué deberá pasar. O sea, no solo lo que ha pasado hasta ahora, que siempre en el pasado no se puede trabajar mucho, pero sí podemos trabajar en el presente y en el futuro. Yo creo que Cuba, a pesar de todos los esfuerzos,
So, Omar wants to welcome everyone to his presentation, and he's saying that he will attempt in a very short time to provide a very detailed overview of recent developments in the Cuban economy.
A pesar de todos los esfuerzos que se han hecho durante el periodo de Raúl Castro, que comenzó en el 2008, la economía cubana en el último año entró en recesión.
The main point here, and you can see the graph on the slideshow board, is that regardless of all the efforts that were made by President Raúl Castro in recent years, over the last year, the Cuban economy has entered a period of recession.
Es decir, que a pesar de todas las medidas que se puedan catalogar, positivas o no, los resultados económicos no se expresan en los indicadores macroeconómicos del país.
So, regardless of whether the measures that were implemented by Raúl Castro would be considered positive or not, the economic indicators show that the economy has entered a period of difficulty and recession.
Y aunque las autoridades cubanas plantean que este año 2017 debe crecerse a un 2%, las bases de ese crecimiento no están muy visibles todavía.
Even though the Cuban government has indicated that the percentage growth for real GDP, it's forecasted to be 2% this year, the economic foundations required for that are not presently visible or available in the Cuban economy.
De hecho, el déficit fiscal del año 2017 va a ser el más grande déficit fiscal de los últimos 8 años.
As you can see on that slide, the fiscal deficit the forecasted fiscal deficit for 2017 will be the largest one in the last 10 years.
Por lo tanto, la única vía posible de resolver ese déficit es aumentando los ingresos del país. Y para aumentar los ingresos no queda opción que desarrollar la fuerza productiva.
So the only way to address this growing fiscal deficit is to improve the economic fortunes of the country, and to do that, the productive forces have to be released.
Cuba sigue teniendo déficit comercial y cada vez de forma creciente.
Cuba continues to have a trade balance deficit, and the trade balance seems to be increasing over time.
Y eso está determinado por la estructura de las importaciones cubanas.
This condition is determined by the structure of Cuba's imports, that is merchandise imports. That's what
es decir, seguimos importando bienes intermedios, materias primas, pero eso no lo convertimos después en exportaciones vía manufactura.
So Cuba continues, as you can see, to import significant amounts of raw materials and capital goods, but it hasn't been able to successfully convert those into manufactured goods for exports.
Es decir, se importa muy pocos bienes de capital, maquinarias, equipos, fábricas, y si no inviertes no podrás crecer nunca, porque el factor que a la larga hace crecer un país es las inversiones, el crecimiento, es las nuevas esferas productivas.
Okay, so there isn't sufficient amount of capital goods that are being imported, which are required for growth, and at the same time, there isn't that domestic investment, that domestic capital formation, which is required for economic growth.
Seguimos teniendo todavía un comercio elevado con Venezuela.
There is a high level of external trade with Venezuela. Also, by the way, you can see the external trade dependency there.
Y ustedes conocen que cuando uno tiene una concentración de comercio con un gran país y ese país tiene dificultades económicas, se tienen que trasladar a Cuba obligatoriamente.
So the large concentration of trade with a single trading partner means that Cuba will internalize all the economic difficulties faced by that internal
De todas maneras, el comercio de Cuba con Venezuela viene cayendo en los últimos 2 años.
Over the last 2 years, Cuba's trade with Venezuela has been declining.
Las exportaciones siguen muy concentradas en pocos productos. Es decir, estamos hablando de muy poco peso tiene el azúcar dentro de nuestra estructura, cuando debería tener un peso más importante que hay ahora. La minería, que es el níquel, tiene muchas dificultades por capacidad de producción y por precio. Y en el color verde aparecen factores que tienden a disminuir en el futuro, que es reexportación de combustible. Ya no se puede reexportar combustible porque realmente los ingresos de petróleo de Venezuela han ido disminuyendo extraordinariamente, en algunas ocasiones el 50%.
So here you can see on this graph, you can see the composition of merchandise exports by commodity, by product for Cuba for the last few years. And well, it goes back all the way to 1990, and you can see a decline in the value of the principal merchandise exports of Cuba, which are sugar, nickel, and of course the area that's shaded in green represents the fuel or the oil re-exports of the Cuban economy. That's also in decline.
Cuando uno le suma los servicios a la balanza comercial del país, la situación tiende a mejorar. Es decir, Cuba tiene superávit, pero la gran dificultad es que ese superávit tiende casi a ser cero en el año 2016.
So when services, exports of services are added to the trade balance, Cuba has a surplus, but as you can see here, that surplus is almost disappearing in 2016.
Y el factor determinante es el pago de los servicios profesionales que Cuba cobraba en Venezuela.
The main component of Cuba's service exports, of course, is the factor payments that Cuba received for providing medical services in Venezuela.
Un economista cubano, Pavel Vidal, estimó que en el 2017 se van a reinvertir esas curvas.
So one of our colleagues, le voy a añadir algo, who's been here at the Billner Center several times, Pavel Vidal, has forecasted that the trends that you see on this diagram will be inverted in 2017.
Ahora, la variable que parece ser que sí tiene una sostenibilidad en el tiempo es el turismo.
The variable that looks to be sustainable over time is tourism.
Cuba ya llegó a 4 millones de turistas y aunque el turismo norteamericano ha sido el más dinámico, también es un mito pensar que el crecimiento del turismo se debe a los turistas norteamericanos. Los turistas norteamericanos es apenas el 6% de los turistas que llegan a Cuba.
As you can see on this diagram, the number of arrivals in Cuba, tourist arrivals in Cuba has already surpassed the 4 million mark. And the other comment is that although it's widely believed that the United States, the influx of tourists from the United States will make a major dent in the Cuban economy, they only represent around 6% of the total.
Es decir, los turistas norteamericanos tienen la dinámica de crecimiento más elevada, un 80% en el 2016, y va a seguir creciendo, pero está alrededor de los 200,000 visitantes.
So the tourists from the United States represent the fastest growing category. El 80% de qué que
Hay un crecimiento del número de turistas de Estados Unidos, un 80%.
So the growth rate of tourists from the United States has been 80% in the last period, and certainly this is the fastest growing segment. But again, they represent a very small percentage of the total.
Y eso se debe, entre otras cosas, a la cantidad de acuerdos de administración hotelera que tienen las principales compañías europeas con Cuba.
This is the growth rate that you can see there, or the numbers that you can see here, have to do with the management administration agreements between European tourism management companies or tour operators.
Liderando esto el grupo Meliá de España.
The number one on that list is Meliá from Spain.
Y a partir del próximo año hay que agregar en esas estadísticas 2 compañías norteamericanas.
Beginning next year, we have to add 2 American companies that have agreements with Cuba.
Ya hay un hotel administrado por Estados Unidos en Cuba.
As many of you know, there's already a hotel that's administered by an American company in Cuba.
Tal vez a final de este año hayan 3 hoteles.
Maybe 3 by the end of this year.
Ahora, ¿cuáles han sido las principales cosas que está haciendo el gobierno de Raúl Castro en los últimos años que ha tenido algún resultado? Primero, el sector privado. Sí. Yo creo que el sector privado, con todas las facilidades que le dio el Estado, ha venido creciendo de forma sistemática.
So as you can see here, the non-state sector, or also sometimes people use the term private sector, has been one of the most dynamic sectors in the Cuban economy after the reforms introduced by Raúl Castro.
En el gráfico podemos ver que sobrepasan las 535,000 licencias otorgadas.
There's more than 535,000 licenses or patentes that have been granted
Después en las preguntas podemos hablar de qué está pasando ahora. pero no se ha virado para atrás ninguna de las licencias otorgadas.
So none of these licenses have been returned at the present time, and he just mentioned that later during the Q&A session we can talk more about this topic.
Eso está llevando que el empleo en el sector estatal está disminuyendo y donde único crece el empleo en el sector privado o cooperativo.
As a result, you can see the diminishing of the employment in the state sector, and by contrast, you can see there on that graph that there has been an increase in employment in the non-state sector, in the emerging non-state sector.
Una variable que el Estado le dio mucha fuerza en un inicio y para mí no ha tenido el éxito esperado es el avance de las cooperativas urbanas.
So one category within this expansion of the non-state sector, which really received a lot of support from the government, but hasn't shown the result, a lot of in the urban co-ops.
Porque se aprobaron un grupo de 498 cooperativas, pero en los últimos 2 años no se ha aprobado ninguna cooperativa.
So yeah, so the number, I know that's in English and everybody can read it, but the numbers that you see there are the numbers that have been approved over the last 2 years, but there are about 300 that are being evaluated, but there haven't been any new approvals.
Y cuando uno entra dentro de esas cooperativas urbanas, se da cuenta que muchos eran restaurantes estatales que han pasado a ser cooperativas de comercio.
Many of these urban cooperatives or non-production cooperatives are really former government-run restaurants that have been converted into co-ops.
Hay algunas en la construcción que han avanzado.
There's some in construction, as some of you may know, in the construction sector.
Pero eso no ha dado los resultados que se pensaba que deberían dar las cooperativas urbanas en el país.
Yeah, so the point is that the anticipated outcomes haven't been achieved.
Esta es la medida que todo el mundo dice que cuándo será, es decir, eliminar la dualidad monetaria. Yo creo que a pesar de todos los esfuerzos que se han hecho y de que es necesario cambiar la moneda, dejar una sola moneda, es muy difícil en las coyunturas actuales hacer ese cambio.
So one of the central themes of the Cuban economy is the monetary duality, and the point is that at the present time, although it's recognized officially that this is a necessary reform, Cuba doesn't have the conditions to really pursue this.
Aunque en Cuba todo es posible.
I don't need to translate that, I think.
Porque a pesar de la situación tan difícil de no crecimiento, déficit fiscal, que no exportas, etcétera, incluir una variable monetaria de esa índole que puede llevar a un aumento de precio es una variable muy difícil de implementar en estos momentos.
Pero, déjame, eso es un punto importante. So the very important point that Omar is making about monetary unification is that that would add a higher level of uncertainty in the economy, and given the conditions of the Cuban economy, that would make the transformations more difficult. Creo que eso fue, yeah.
La otra es las reformas a la agricultura, que se la voy a dejar a Mario para que la explique. Realmente, a pesar de todas las entregas de tierra, de todos los cambios que se han dado en la agricultura, todavía hay un problema de precios elevados por parte de la población que no se logran resolver.
Yes, so the agricultural reforms, you know, despite of all the reforms and all the transformations that have taken place really since 2007, one of the main issues is the tendency towards higher prices of agricultural products that hasn't been resolved. So food inflation, really. So.
Hay toda una serie de reformas que se hicieron de eliminación de prohibiciones que se mantienen. Solo lo que está creciendo de forma sistemática, no sé, es el tema de las zonas wifi, que es algo que avanza constantemente. Yo creo que sí, ahí ha habido buen resultado. Ya el Estado se dio cuenta al fin que el Internet es importante. Yo creo que pensaban que no era importante y ahora de forma acelerada están aumentando las zonas donde la población se puede conectar y ya empiezan a haber zonas de La Habana que ya tienen Internet en los hogares.
So you can see here a menu of reforms that have been sort of implemented since 2007. The principal one, the one that seems to be moving ahead at a faster pace is the expansion of Wi-Fi zones in other cities in Cuba. and particularly in the city of Havana. So the point is that there has been an expansion, and the government is recognizing the importance of the internet and online connectivity.
La zona de desarrollo especial Mariel es un buen proyecto, es un proyecto importante que realmente debería tener más apoyo. Sin embargo, la lentitud en las aprobaciones ha sido muy elevada. Es decir, solamente hay aprobadas 19 empresas, que no significa que las 19 estén en producción, solamente están en operaciones 7 empresas, y de ahí realmente aparecen ahí el número de las empresas que están en estos momentos en la zona de desarrollo especial.
So another key measure has been the development of the Mariel Special Development Zone, and up until now, 19 projects have been approved, but there are only 7 enterprises that are fully operational. And so it doesn't mean that those projects that have been approved, of course, are operating. So this is a good measure, but still a lot has to be done.
Yo creo que los valores y el tipo de empresas que están ubicados en esa zona significaría que hay que aceptar muchas de las propuestas que existen en estos momentos de invertir en esa zona.
So that I think I have to translate. So the point is that given the importance of the Mariel Free Trade Zone, capitalizing on the potential of this project would mean accepting a lot of the investment proposals that have been presented to the government.
Y de esas 19 que ya estaban aprobadas, sí, 10 son de capital 100% extranjero.
Out of the 19 projects that have been approved, 10 are from companies that are 100% foreign owned.
Y hay 40 compañías en una etapa final de aprobación. Se dijo en noviembre, estamos ya en febrero, no se acaban de aprobar. Por lo tanto, el ritmo yo creo que hay que acelerarlo, todo el mundo lo dice, Raúl Castro se refirió a eso, pero no se siguen aprobando empresas con el nivel que se necesita.
So, yes, at the bottom, the lower bullet, you can see that there are 40 companies that are the final stage of approval. That was announced in November. Nothing has happened yet, so he believes that the pace needs to be accelerated.
La nueva ley de inversión, la 118, también pasa algo por el estilo. Se han hecho 3 carpetas de oportunidades, creo que son buenas carpetas. Sin embargo, solamente he aprobado 54 negocios bajo esta ley, y de esos 35 son contratos de administración hotelera que son mucho más rápidos. Por lo tanto, aquí también digo, la velocidad es lenta, hay que ir mucho más rápido si queremos que la inversión extranjera contribuya al crecimiento económico del país.
So here on this slide, you're seeing the result of after the approval of the foreign investment law. And let me get closer so I can see what's going on. So this is under Decree 118, 54 have been approved, as you can see, but 30 are in tourism. And the ones in tourism, las del turismo son contrato de administración.
35.
Son 35 o 30? 35. Sorry, 35 in tourism and 19 in the Mariel Development Zone. And so the point that the professor is making is that the pace also has to be accelerated.
Ahora, desde el punto de vista externo, estamos en el mejor momento que ha tenido Cuba a lo largo del año 90 hacia acá. Es decir, no tenemos dificultades externas de pago, se han condonado las deudas, se sigue pagando. O sea, ese es un tema medio que resuelto que no significa presión para la economía cubana.
So here, this slide talks about the external conditions that are facing the Cuban economy. And the professor says that he believes that this is the external sector environment is the most favorable for Cuba since 1990. The external debt has been renegotiated, and Cuba has made some payments on that debt. So this is a very important point in that history.
La presión es que hay que pagar. Por lo tanto, si en el año 86 yo no pagaba nada, después que me condonaron las deudas, pero me dejaron un 10%, Cuba se ve en la obligación de realmente responder en el momento justo en los pagos que han sido acordados. Y eso significa dinero que hay que sacar de la circulación para el pago de estos compromisos externos.
So yeah, so Cuba still has some outstanding debt that must be satisfied, and that of course means generating the foreign exchange receipts to be able to honor that debt. Creo que lo dije bien rápido, pero entendieron.
Ahora, estamos en una nueva etapa, podemos decir una etapa donde Cuba realmente ha ido mejorando o normalizando las relaciones con Estados Unidos. Ha habido ejemplos concretos, ya explicaba al principio, que en el caso del turismo, aunque no marca el crecimiento del turismo en Cuba, sí, realmente la dinámica es muy grande. El 80% de los turistas, de los visitantes de Estados Unidos se incrementaron en el 2016. En el tema de la transportación hay ejemplos concretos de la transportación aérea que ha dado muy buenos resultados. Es decir, hay cosas concretas que se pueden observar en las relaciones Cuba-Estados Unidos.
Their U.S.-Cuba relations, particularly after the announcement of December 17, 2014, are beginning to show some signs of improvement. We can see the impact on tourism. There's been gradual progress towards normalizing economic ties and spillover effects into other sectors of the Cuban economy, such as finance, construction, agriculture, and transportation. He highlighted transportation, obviously, because there's a very significant flow of goods from here and money directed to the transportation sector.
En Cuba, hasta el 20 de enero de este año, se tenía la percepción de que todo lo que se había avanzado con respecto a Cuba y Estados Unidos se iba a mantener. O sea, que no iba a haber cambios irreversibles. Hoy yo no estoy seguro que eso pueda suceder.
Traduzco eso, ¿no? So until January the 20th of this year, the general perception in Cuba was that all the advancements that were made earlier, beginning in 2009, would be sustained, would be maintained, and I'm referring to U.S.-Cuba relations and improvements in Cuban relations, remittances and travel liberalization and so on.
Aunque tampoco podemos adelantarnos, realmente no ha habido cambios, pero como aquí los cambios se hacen de un día para otro y muy grandes, no sabemos cuál será el alcance. Lo que sí sabemos es que Cuba tiene que cambiar internamente y sabemos que Cuba tiene que, independientemente de lo que pase en Estados Unidos, seguir avanzando y abriendo más la economía y sobre todo ir tratando de buscar las reservas productivas que tengan internamente.
So there's obviously we are at a time of uncertainty when it comes to U.S.-Cuba relations, although no substantial changes have taken place as of recently. In the previous slide, he had a question mark with the name of the President Trump. So question mark, and I think everybody who's here who studies Cuba, we all have the question marks. But the point that he made that I think it's really worth translating, that wasn't in the slide, is that Cuba has to make internal changes and dynamic changes and rapid changes to its economy.
Es decir, ojalá que la normalización entre Cuba y Estados Unidos continúe, pero eso no es una variable que pueden decidir los cubanos.
So the hope is that the path towards normalizing U.S.-Cuba relations will continue, but obviously that's not just something that could be chosen by Cubans.
Sin embargo, Cuba va a estar sometida a procesos muy intensos en este año y en el próximo año.
So, well, voy a traducir exactamente eso. So Cuba will be undergoing very intense processes in this year and in the following year.
Tiene que salir una ley electoral. Se plantea, se dice, pero ¿qué es el contenido de esa ley electoral? No se conoce.
So one thing that's must come out on the Cuban side, it's an election law, but no one knows what the content will be, what the parameters will be. It's unknown.
Debe cambiar la Constitución.
Constitution has to be changed.
Por ejemplo, la Constitución cubana vigente ahora no permite el sector privado, para ponerle un ejemplo de contradicciones.
Yeah, so in the current Cuban Constitution does not recognize or permit the private sector, so he considers that to be an internal contradiction.
El presidente cubano ha dicho que deja su cargo el 24 de febrero del 2018, lo ha venido repitiendo, por lo tanto, tiene que haber la elección de un nuevo presidente, o cómo se hará el nuevo presidente. Entonces son cosas que van a transcurrir en estos próximos años.
So yes, on the political front, I think many of you are probably aware of the fact that Raúl Castro has announced that on February 24th, 2018, he will step down. So presumably there will be elections, and so what is the process, and it will have to happen.
Pongo el apellido y todo el mundo sabrá por qué lo pongo, Trump, lo dejo ahí. Y después, la muerte de Fidel Castro, ¿qué ha significado para los cubanos? ¿Cómo será sin la generación histórica en los próximos 2 años dirigiendo el país? O sea, son cuestiones, son de las conversaciones, pero lo que está claro es que Cuba tiene que avanzar por sí mismo en los cambios que necesita. Y para eso hay que obviar un poco la ideología y sobreponerla sobre la economía. No es lo mismo decrecer y seguir en recesión que abrir un poco más en las fuerzas productivas de Cuba para que realmente el país sea más sostenido que el futuro.
Okay.
Muchas gracias.
Voy a traducir tu último eso porque eso es importante, ¿no? Ese es el cierre de tu, tengo la computadora para adelante y para atrás. So as you can see on the slide here, there are several points, and I think the reading from that is that there are many things up in the air, right? There's some degree of uncertainty, and what would be the result of the election of Trump here? What would be U.S.-Cuba policy? What would be the legacy of the passing of Fidel Castro? And so what the professor indicated is that no matter what, Cuba must continue to make openings internally at its own pace, and to find, my takeaway was that to find ways to grow out of the recession in which the Cuban economy finds itself. Creo que. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Mario. Thank you. Aplausos, Mario. Mario is playing in 2 hats today. He's translated, and now he's going to present something on some notes on Cuban agriculture. Now, as he resets his neurons, his brain, so we'll give you a couple of minutes for that. Let me just point out, highlight something that Omar has said, which I think is remarkable, stunning. He said not only the economic reforms are essential and major and incomplete, but also, he says, Cuba this year and next year has to really engage in major institutional changes of the political order, constitutional order, preparing for the election of Raúl Castro, who is on record as saying that he will step down by a year from now, February 2018. That's really a major phenomenon. So there is both an economic agenda, major, incomplete, as well as a constitutional political process that has to be unfolding this year. Now, he points out that the older generation is aging, and therefore these questions will need to be answered by younger leaders as well as the older ones, and it's going to be a very difficult process for Cuba and those who follow Cuba. Very challenging, very exciting. So those of you thinking of writing dissertations, papers, books, letters, may have a field day reflecting on these topics. So gracias, Mario, and gracias, Omar. Very stimulating presentation. We'll go back with questions now. Mario is going to take our own Mario Gonzalez Corso, who is essential for the Cuba Center here in New York, at the Billner Center. He's going to be offering some remarks on the slow velocity or speed of the agricultural reforms and what the challenges they pose. Mario, we would urge you to, so that we can focus on Omar's main themes, which are huge, to then do maybe no more than 15 minutes?
Sure.
Good.
13 and a half, I'll do.
15.
So I want to thank everyone for attending our panel. I want to welcome Omar, who's a good friend and a colleague, and I also want to thank the Mauricio Font and the staff at the Billner Center for always putting these panels together about the Cuban economy and Cuban culture and Cuba in general. So Now I will talk in English and Omar will translate for me in Spanish. No, mentira, mentira. He will do it. So, when we think about the topics that Omar presented, my presentation is different because he looked at the whole macroeconomy. I only look at a subsector of a sector within the macroeconomy. So I'll talk about agriculture, but more specifically, I'm interested in seeing what is the condition and what is the present condition and what is the outlook for the farmers, the so-called private farmers, which is a misconceptualization of farming in Cuba. So I'll talk about the usufruct farmers, I'll talk about recent trends and developments, and then we'll move on to see what is the potential outcome or outlook for these people. Let me begin by saying that usufruct farming, really, it's a legal arrangement between the state and non-state farmers who are leasing, so to speak, the land from the state. Probably in a free market economy, probably one idea would be franchising. If you think about franchising, you have a franchisor, the entity like McDonald's that owns the name, the brand, and you have the franchisees who own multiple retail outlets and so on. When you look at usufruct farming in Cuba, many people think it originated in the 1960s, but it did not. It originated in 1995, in probably the beginning of the recovery of Cuban agriculture from the worst year of the special period, okay? So usufruct farming means, in the Cuban context, that the government, the state, retains legal ownership and rights over the land. And what I found was that it says that farmers have the right to cultivate the land, commercialize the products, and do so for a predetermined time period. Well, that's kind of questionable because commercializing the product is not as straightforward as the definition here implies. The reason why I think, and I wanted to talk about this, is just to follow up on a panel that we had back in May where we talked about agriculture, and I gave an update, sort of like a more macro update of the agricultural sector. Not much has changed in the agricultural sector, but what I felt that would be interesting to talk about today would be the conditions of the usufruct farmers. And I have to begin by usufruct farmers, beginning the economic reforms pertaining to farming. And, the most significant economic reforms have been these transfers of land from the state sector to the non-state sector. And so that really happened back in 2008, but the real measure came into play in 2012, and that's Decree Law 300. And so notice that one thing that it did was it increased the size of the parcels that the farmers can use. Okay, but the duration of the contracts is very short. That's one of the main limitations that they have. The durations of these contracts are very short. In 2012, usufruct farmers, think of them again as lessees of this land. They were given the right to build structures, permanent structures on their land. In Spanish, in the Cuban law, this is called bienhechurias, which means sort of goodwill, but not goodwill in the accounting financial sense that I teach my students, but bienhechurias is the building of a permanent structure that will have a common good, that will have a good impact. Okay, and another interesting provision of Decree Law 300 is that in theory, the farmers should be reimbursed by the state for their investment at the assessed value if the agreement is terminated. Now, Omar mentioned the fact that the Cuban government has a budget deficit and a trade deficit and so on, so that's kind of questionable where the resources are going to come from, but that's what the law says. Other transformations, very quickly, are microcredits. These are microloans available to some farmers from state-owned banks. There's no private credit market in Cuba. I think everybody here knows that. At least there's no legally recognized private credit market in Cuba. So maybe there is an underground market, but so these are credit loans, microcredits offered by two banks in Cuba, Banco Popular de Ahorro, Banco Metropolitano, What I found is that less than 1% of the usufruct farmers that qualify have applied for these loans. This is since 2011, so they're not very popular, these loans. There's a lot of restrictions, and the paperwork to get them it's quite gigantic. One thing that the government did, which I think was a good measure, was to provide a tax exemption to the usufruct farmers. And that meant that they were given a grace period of 2 years not to pay taxes back in 2013, and then it was extended for 4 more years for farmers who were clearing their land from Marabou. I wrote down a little piece of paper the scientific name for Marabou, but I couldn't pronounce it, so I'm just not gonna do that. Something very strange. Marabou is it's a tree that it's very difficult to kill, you know, and the trunk is very very heavy, very thick, and very difficult to clear the land, and it multiplies like rabbits. Marabou, it's before you know it, it'll be all over your house, let me give you an idea. My own family has a private farm, and I looked at the income statement, you know, on the back of a paper that my brother made, and about 50% of the expenditures were to clear some of the land with Marabou. So that's how much it means. That's how much it hinders the agricultural sector. Anyway, other reforms have to do with taxation. We mentioned taxation. The other one has to do with commercializing agricultural products and so on. But I want to move on and look at some of the trends and some of the developments. And here you can see the numbers of farmers from 2012 to 2014. Now, those numbers have a mystery behind them, because out of the 300,000 that you see in 2012, already about 50% of those were given usufruct beginning in the 1990s. So the growth rate that I have here, 3.8%, you know, from 2012 to 2014, it's actually higher when we extrapolate those numbers and we get rid of the people who were given usufruct beginning in 1995. What's more interesting is the amount of land delivered. Now, there hasn't been much change. If you notice, there's been an increase of 13%, so percentage-wise that may seem like a lot, but it's really 1.7 million hectares. So that's really not a lot. Okay, a lot of, but the land has grown faster than the number of farmers. What I want to show you here, just to present a background here, is one of the impacts of, you know, this land agrarian reform has been changing the distribution of land in Cuba. And you'll notice you have data for 2007 and for 2014, and you'll notice one thing. There's a category all the way to the right titled CCS and private. CCS are Cooperativas de Créditos y Servicios, which are more autonomous cooperatives that were created in the 1960s. Private, it's confusing, because private is not just usufruct farmers, but it's also private farmers like my family who own land, private land, after a portion of it was confiscated, of course, but we own private land, but we're not, my cousins are not usufruct farmers, but they're private farmers, so they're counted in there. So these statistics are fascinating for me to try to figure it out, but here's the main point. If you look at the amount of agricultural surface, the growth rate from 2007 to 2014 bless you, for the CCS and the private, that's an increase of 54%. If you look at the, what did I do here? The amount of cultivated land, increase from 2007 to 2014 of 73%. What does that mean? It means that there has been some kind of land reform in Cuba. If you also look at the total land held by the agricultural land held by the state sector versus the non-state sector, you can see the numbers reveal the trends quite clearly. Let me move on and show you more. So in 2007, the CCS and the private farmers had 18% of the land. Look at the change from 2007 to 2014. Look at the cultivated land. It went from 26% to 40%. So there's been a redistribution of land away from the less efficient state sector to the more efficient non-state sector, including the private farmers, the CCS, and the usufruct farmers. I wish I had data that I could parse and really show you the picture of the usufruct farmers, but I'm only going by what the official data are, by the official statistics by the Cuban government. So we have a redistribution of land. Then we have a reduction. This is good news, actually. This is a reduction, on table 4, a reduction in the amount of idle land, quite dramatically. Look at the percentage change. It's negative 22%. So there's been a decline of 22% in the idle land, fallow land that has that's recorded officially in Cuba, and that's between 2007 and 2014. What does that mean? It means that to some degree the reform has worked by incentivizing these usufruct farmers and others to actually plant more land. Okay. However, the agricultural surface of the country has declined by 5%. So no wonder why Cuba has to import food mainly from the United States and other parts of the world, right? So external trade and agriculture are intrinsically connected when it comes to the Cuban economy. I don't have the time to really get into the employment dynamics here, but the employment dynamics are quite fascinating because for every usufruct farmer, it is assumed that 4 additional jobs are created. So you take 300,000 on average and you multiply that by a factor of 4.0 and you get 1,200,000 in addition to the 300. So that's 1.5 million people that are indirectly and directly linked to the usufruct farming if the estimate is correct. And I think that estimate is pretty close. Okay, so what are the prospects? And rather than getting to the macro challenges of the Cuban agriculture, I want to finish up by talking about the challenges that the usufruct farmers are facing. And by the way, why is it so important in this panel about the results of the Cuban economy, to talk about 300,000 farmers and 1.5 million jobs? And the reason is the transfer of land has been the most significant structural reform implemented by Raul Castro since 2007. And that's also connected, by the way, to the other most significant structural reform, which is the expansion of employment in the non-state sector. So what are some of the challenges of these farmers? Well, the first one, I think, is the short-term and unpredictable nature of their contracts. And so I did some research, and I compared their contracts with similar contracts in China and Vietnam during the more or less the same stage of, let's just call it transition, as the Cuban economy is undergoing right now. Different time, different environment, different external sector relations, but that could be a proxy to compare. So in the case of Cuba, 10 years for natural persons. So you only have 10 years, only 10 years to invest, to clear the land, to make it profitable, to sell your product, compared to 50 years or perpetuity in the case of China and Vietnam. Another problem with the contract of usufruct, which is, I guess, a lease contract, is that it could be terminated by the state at will. And it could be terminated for several reasons, such as the failure to deliver output to Acopio. It could also be terminated if the farmers hire more people than what's legally permitted. So, for example, if they hire people who are not family members, who are paid under the books, and so on. And then here's an interesting one. It could be terminated because the usufruct farmer fails to meet social objectives and fails to protect the public interest, however that is defined. Okay, so in 2015 was a critical year. There were 43,000 terminations of these contracts in Cuba. And the reason given, and this is not given in a critical year in the yearly statistical yearbook, this is given in the media, in the Cuban media, that is in the state-controlled media. The reason was the incorrect use of land. I have no idea what that means. So in the Q&A session, I'll be more than happy to take your questions, but I will tell you what I'm saying now. I don't know what it means. Okay. The second challenge, and I'll wrap it up very soon, is 75% of these farmers in usufruct indicated that they didn't have any prior farming experience. These are people who are transitioning away from other sectors of the Cuban labor market or from the Cuban economy, and they're going to wing it as farmers. So the failure rate, which is never calculated in Cuba, must be very high. Okay, what is 75%? That's 234,000 out of the 312,000 that were there. Okay, and 12,000. The problem that they have is microcredits. Microcredits are not very popular with these farmers. Only 1% have taken advantage of these microcredits. If I made a presentation here about if I presented you a flow diagram of what you need to do to get those microcredits in Cuba, Mauricio will never let me come here again. Because it will be too much. Let me finish and say, look at number 4. 50% or more of the land that's given to these usufruct farmers is covered by Marabu. It's almost like the government wants them to fail. Short lease terms, short-term contracts, no credit, no inputs, and so on, and then we'll give you the worst land, the one that nobody wants, covered by Marabu. Finally, what we all know about Cuban agriculture. Provisions regarding the sale of output. There's a law that codifies what output can be sold. This was codified in 2013, and then in 2015 there was something else. And then what I said before, and I'll wrap it up, difficulties, the brutal bureaucratic processes to obtain these titles of usufruct land. So I leave you with sort of a very depressing note here that it's very difficult. It's almost like, my point is that it seems that the government in many ways wants them to fail. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Mario. And we are going to move to take questions from the audience. We'll take 3 questions and then 3 more later and so on and so forth. The reasons for my own analysis of why it's low was that I will do that at the end as in the form of a question. So I will, in an effort to save time and make time for your questions, I will open up the floor at this point.
Si está bajando ahora, entiendo la importación de petróleo de crudo de Venezuela, de que 90,000 barriles a 50,000. ¿Están importando de otros países, de los sauditas, de Irán, de otros sitios? Y estos están subsidized. Are these subsidized?
Okay. Mine is more an observation. I just came back from Cuba a couple of weeks ago. The tourism, it seems to be where the government is putting all its money. The Parque Central, all of the huge buildings are being converted into hotels. One huge hotel from scratch is going to be overlooking the Moto Castle. The other observation is that it's very, very sad that the bureaucracy of Cuba doesn't care 2 bits about the people. I mean, the agriculture really needs to have where they can sell to the people, because people are living on 2 legs of chicken a month, 1 pound of rice. It's unconscionable.
Okay.
Hi. Omar mentioned the debt restructuring, and you mentioned only the downside of it, but the upside is that that was an extremely important step toward Cuba's reintegration into the global economy, and it will open up the access to external financing, particularly from Europe, because the Paris Club restructuring also came with a normalization of relations with the European Union. So I think that though there is a cost in terms of the financial commitments that need to be made to repay the debt, the upside is very, very important for Cuba's future.
Bueno, con respecto a la importación de petróleo, sí, Cuba ha tenido que importar petróleo de otros países, de Argelia, de Angola, y también ha sido producto de un proceso de ahorro interno. Es decir, se han disminuido extraordinariamente lo que antes se distribuía y se está tratando de aumentar la exploración interna, tratando de aumentar los niveles de importación. Recuerda que Cuba importa el 50% de lo que necesita. En el año 90 Cuba importaba el 100% de lo que necesita. Por lo tanto, las condiciones, a pesar de las afectaciones de Venezuela, no es lo mismo ahora que en el año 90. De todas maneras, se han ido comprando también equipos más eficientes, pero es un problema de un país que importa petróleo realmente haber dependido en tantos volúmenes de un país, pero que no era decisión fácil de no hacerlo. Recordar que Cuba tiene médicos en Venezuela y ese pago de petróleo se hace con médicos de Venezuela. O sea que tampoco es que nos fuimos para Venezuela por no irnos para otro país. O sea, realmente ahí hay una condición más que política que también te llevaba a esperar hasta el final a ver qué pasaba.
So the question came about the oil imports of Cuba, and if I understood the question correctly, had to do with whether or not Cuba was able to diversify the sources of imports besides Venezuela, because it's well known that the amount of shipments has been reduced. The response was that yes, Cuba. Okay, so the answer is no, they're not subsidized, as far as I know. I'm saying that, I'm not saying he's saying it, yeah. But, right, so
as far as we know.
As far as we know, it's finished. It's dwindling tremendously, you know. So his response was that there were other sources, Algeria, no? Angola.
And the reduction of consumption. Reduction of consumption, Angola, Algeria.
So what he pointed was, and that's a good point too, and I think that the fact that Cuba has announced energy consumption measures that, you know, and has begun to import more energy efficient equipment and all that. So energy is a major bottleneck for the Cuban economy. And then the other point that Professor Everleni made was that this is different than the beginning of the special period because Cuba, the dependency on those imports has been declining. So I think he mentioned 50% or something like that.
Well, you want to answer the question on agriculture?
Yeah, absolutely. Agriculture, so thank you for bringing it up. There is a decree law that has, in a very experimental basis, and the experiment's still going on. You know, experiments in the Cuban economy seem to be prolonged and prolonged and prolonged. That in Havana province and in Artemisa and Mayabeque, there would be somewhat deregulation of commercialization of agriculture. But then, and let me just look here, there was a decree law, and I have to look at my notes here because I forgot, 152C and 167, May 13, 2016. And what that does, it actually recentralizes agricultural commercialization again. So it's moving backwards. And the justification for it was something that Professor Verleni mentioned. I didn't allude to it in my presentation, but anybody who travels to Cuba knows, you could see it on the ground, which is food inflation, right? So the government said, well, we need to just how they're doing with the private taxes now, we need to control prices. The problem is prices, right? Prices they're ignoring the laws of supply and demand, obviously, for obvious reasons. There's nothing there. But you're right. And it's recognized, but it's not done that it has to be facilitated, the sales directly to the population. But it comes back to production. Look at the usufructuarios, the usufruct farmers. Look at all the limitations they have. Look at the limitations that the private farmers encounter. Look at the failing state enterprises in agriculture who are not profitable, who are subsidized by the state, By the way, money's taken away from the central budget to finance their operations. So agriculture is a big problem. And one final point, I'm one of the minorities of, academics who study Cuba who believes that agriculture is central to the Cuban economy. It's not just tourism, sand, beach, sun, fun, reggaeton, it's agriculture. Cuba is an agricultural country. So,
There was a recent New York Times article, I believe, and somebody else saying that the agricultural crisis was coming. There may be a food crisis. Why? Because tourists are consuming. There are now 4 million tourists in Cuba, 4 millones de turistas, ¿no? Plus the Cubans. And that demand is so high and production is so low that Cuba faces a huge deficit in food.
Con respecto al turismo, realmente la política que siguió Cuba, sin mirar mucho para el futuro, fue desarrollar un turismo de sol y playa. Y realmente los esfuerzos en los últimos 15 años fue desarrollar un turismo de sol y playa con una alta calidad en detrimento de la ciudad. De pronto cayó el boom turístico a las capitales. En estos momentos no tiene reservas en ninguna época del año. Siempre se pensaba que era la Feria de La Habana. Hoy en la actualidad resolver un hotel en la capital ha costado trabajo. De ahí realmente la política acelerada en los últimos 2 años de recuperar 3 instalaciones. Una se va a inaugurar recientemente, que es la Manzana de Gómez, pero hay un tema que se queja todos los europeos, que es el tema del aumento de los precios de los hoteles. Y a pesar del aumento de los precios de los hoteles están llenos, pero están reservados por norteamericanos. Entonces ahí hay los turistas que venían a sol y playa, pero querían pasar un día a ver La Habana Vieja, casi no lo pueden hacer, a no ser que hayan reservado por Airbnb. Que eso está potenciando realmente en los últimos meses un aumento sostenido del número de habitaciones privadas que se están reservando, con un aumento de precios a los privados, que tenían establecido entre 30 y 35 dólares por cuarto, ahora Airbnb lo ha fijado en 50. Por lo tanto, hay un beneficio a nivel privado. Son temas que hay que resolver, el tema de la calidad en la capital, en los hoteles, con el aumento de precios. Yo me he quedado en un hotel aquí en Nueva York, en el medio de Nueva York, con 193 dólares. Ya en La Habana no hay ningún hotel de eso. Y no es lo mismo Manhattan que La Habana.
So Omar pointed out to the crisis, to the boom in tourism, that a lot of this was justified for the beach and sun and sand. And now, but the city was left behind. It's a big gap. And now prices are very high, and therefore opportunities for the private sector. But the crisis is there and needs to be addressed. That's another challenge. So you had a question. Was your question answered?
Yo creo que en el tema, si una de las acciones que ha tenido mucho éxito en los últimos 3 años fue la reestructuración de la deuda. Y lo hemos medido a través de varias acciones. Primero, que mejoramos el indicador que se tenía, el indicador Moody, pasamos a ser estable, pero sobre todo que se han abierto los seguros de nuevo a la exportación. Está el caso de Japón y muchos países europeos que a partir del pago que Cuba ha venido haciendo, vamos a decirles regularmente, aunque ha habido atraso en los últimos 2 meses en pago, se sienten que realmente Cuba está cumpliendo con lo que se comprometió en esas renegociaciones con el Club de París. Pero seguimos estando fuera de todas las organizaciones multilaterales de financiamiento. O sea, no pertenecemos a ningún organismo financiero internacional, estamos con la CAF más o menos ahí en la discusión, pero eso todavía no significa nada concreto para la economía cubana. Por lo tanto, sigue siendo créditos comerciales con las tasas de interés que lleva, pero la situación financiera externa es la mejor que se ha tenido en los últimos años.
So Omar re-emphasized the ability of governments to meet the demands of the foreign debt. So that's the main point. So Cuba has been successful in that regard. Was there any question? No, I guess only question. Yes, you.
In the first presentation, we heard about currency consolidation, and I have just a 2-part question about that.
Questions.
Regarding currency consolidation, you said the conditions aren't right yet. So what kind of conditions would be required to make currency consolidation possible? And then why would currency consolidation then make the economy more unstable?
What are the feelings of the Cubans towards the usufruct versus private property? And would they rather preserve the usufruct if some terms change? And another question is for you, sir. You mentioned before that the urban co-ops, they didn't deliver some results that you were expecting. But what exactly are those results?
Thank you. There's a question, Tom.
Yeah, so this is a question for Mario. Wouldn't the boom in tourism pull labor out of the agricultural sector, and in turn that would aggravate the agricultural crisis?
Bueno, en el tema de la unificación monetaria, lo interesante sería que el país tuviera reservas lo suficientes para enfrentar a los desequilibrios financieros que podrían haber. Sin embargo, eso no es posible, dado lo que ustedes escucharon de mi exposición, realmente los déficits que Cuba tiene. Lo otro hubiera sido ideal tener un prestamista de última instancia, o sea, que sea capaz de pagarte los desajustes que puedan haber. Es decir, hay toda una madeja de acciones, pero el gran problema es que cualquier cambio que tú hagas en dualidad monetaria, obligatoriamente va a haber un incremento de precios. Y con los salarios tan deprimidos que existen todavía en Cuba, aumentar precios sería realmente un Big Bang muy fuerte. Hay que buscar otras variantes, lo que pasa es que las variantes hay que tomarlas ya, porque llevamos hablando de cambio de la dualidad monetaria hace 8 años.
So again, essentially, it's very hard to do the unification of the currency without increasing production. Prices are going up and will be going up faster. There'll be inflation.
Bueno, con respecto a las cooperativas urbanas, nosotros los economistas le decimos cooperativas urbanas. Algunos dicen cooperativas no agropecuarias. Al final es para diferenciar las cooperativas que existieron durante mucho tiempo en Cuba. Las que más han avanzado han sido algunas de la construcción, pero cuando uno se pone a estudiarla dentro de eso, realmente lo que hay es una agrupación de personas privadas que tienen su licencia y se han unido para determinadas actividades. O sea, no funciona en el sentido de cooperativa, donde se reparten todas las utilidades, siempre hay un jefe que busca el trabajo. Es decir, eso tiene... Y la otra que han avanzado más o menos es tener un gran restaurante que siempre fue estatal, decirle a los trabajadores, ahora esto es una cooperativa, sigan trabajando. Entonces, entre ellos se han unido para avanzar. Pero no ha tenido los resultados, el impacto en la economía que debería llevar ya las cooperativas urbanas. De hecho, son pequeñas con respecto a lo que se debería. 397 funcionando. Y de esas, la mayor parte son restaurantes. Y un restaurante, uno solo no hace crecer una economía. Yo creo que hay que tener 1 millón de restaurantes para eso.
So very few non-agricultural co-ops. May I add that they tend to be located in Havana and Matanzas and the western part of the island, not in Oriente, where they are also badly needed. So it's indeed a have a problem which we may want to discuss later.
What I know about the usufruct farmers that I study, that I survey, some people that I know that are personal friends, is that they're attracted to it. It's a lot of work, but they're attracted to it and a lot of risk by potentials of making more money. So I'm going to assume that they're driven by profit incentives and they would like ownership of the land, maybe in perpetuity or maybe in 25-year renewable contracts or something like that. But when you talk to most people off the cuff, they will tell you, I'd rather have private property, right? I'd rather have private property. Okay, so I would make that argument, but it's a very interesting topic. From the professor, thank you for your question. I was hoping that I would avoid the topic of the labor shortage, but it's unavoidable when we talk about agriculture. The Cuban population is aging, but more significantly so in the agricultural sector. I neglected to mention that the average age of a usufruct farmer, it's older than me, 48, 47 years old. That's the average age. So it's middle-aged people that are driven by profit incentives that are going there. The boom in tourism will more than likely reallocate labor away from the agricultural sector, particularly when it spans into other parts of Cuba. So only when it's the premise, it's already happening to some degree. And so that's a real challenge, a big challenge for agriculture. So thank you for your question.
Well, Omar, an empirical question. The prices of food, los precios de la comida, ¿están subiendo? Are they going up?
No.
Not yet.
Realmente los precios no han subido. Lo que pasa es que los precios son muy altos y se mantienen altos durante un tiempo. muy largo. No se puede hacer comparación aquí, no sé, pero realmente cuando uno compara el poder adquisitivo del salario cubano con realmente los precios, los precios tendrían que bajar extraordinariamente. Yo creo que lo único que se salvó en esta coyuntura fue el precio del tomate, que se mantuvo estable alrededor de 10 pesos. Hace un año estaban alrededor de 20 pesos. Pero 10 pesos sigue siendo alto por una libra de tomate de una persona que gana al día 25 pesos. Por lo tanto, realmente los precios lo que se mantienen altos, pero no hay inflación, porque no se mantienen aumentando constantemente.
So prices are high, but they are not increasing. Yeah, no, they are high, but not increasingly high. They are at a plateau.
Sí, una pregunta para el profesor Eberleni, por favor. Usted terminó su presentación diciendo que para el futuro Cuba tendría que utilizar o liberar, no me acuerdo del término, las reservas productivas. Y para los que no somos economistas, quizás eso sea un poco demasiado abstracto. Dos preguntas. Una, ¿qué quiere decir exactamente reservas productivas? Y número dos, ¿cuáles son las dificultades, cuáles son los obstáculos que existen y qué clase de obstáculos son para poder utilizar en el futuro esas reservas productivas que yo no entiendo exactamente lo que son?
Ricardo, that's Professor Ricardo. That's a great question. You want to repeat that in English? In English?
Oh, yes. At the end of Professor Eberleni's presentation, there was a reference to the need to make use of or liberate, I forget the term, the productive reserves of Cuba. And my question is that for those of us who are not economists, the notion of productive reserves is a bit too abstract. So I am wondering, what does the term mean exactly in more concrete terms? And what are the obstacles that stand in the way of utilizing these reservas productivas, whatever they are?
Thank you, Mauricio. Esa es una pregunta para Omar, y que no, en su ponencia no habló de el sector del Estado, el sector del Estado como tal cual. Pero mi pregunta es, como consecuencia de las reformas del sector del Estado, ¿se han visto desempleo? Y en caso que sí, ¿qué está haciendo para combatir eso? Y además, hay un problema creciente en Cuba de los dos sectores, es decir, los que están ganando en pesos y los que están ganando en dólares.
Peter, you want to say that in English?
Yes. My question was really in two parts, asking about the state sector, which was not the primary subject of what Professor Eberleni was talking about, but an area of past reforms. Has there been unemployment generated by those reforms? And if so, what's the government doing about that? And secondly, is there a concern about the differentiation in Cuba between those who are earning salaries in pesos and those who are earning money in dollars?
Yeah, well, farming is hard. I mean, failure, Pele the Conqueror, he couldn't conquer the land. It went into foreclosure. You know, all right, Washington succeeded with slaves. The Russians did well with serfs. Asia has rice, but it's too intensive labor to get that as a successful crop. What are your models? I mean, where do you think success is going to come from? I look around, I haven't seen much. Iowa isn't bad with corn, but that's about it.
Thank you. We have three questions.
How much rationing is left in Cuba now? Where is the rationing? Where is it restricted? And what long-range plans do you have to get rid of rationing? ¿Cuál es la extensión del racionamiento en Cuba en estos momentos? ¿Y hay algún plan a largo plazo para eliminar el mismo?
Very good. I think we're going to recognize Natalia very briefly, because time is running out, but let's be succinct, brief, to the point, both in the question and the question.
Omar, para la unificación de la moneda dijiste que no había suficientes recursos en el momento para lidiar con los choques que vendrían, ¿no?, de una unificación, y no existe una organización internacional que pueda, como garantizar o financiar ese proceso. Pero te aludiste a otras maneras otras perspectivas que se podían usar, y mi pregunta es ¿cuáles son?
The question about successful farming. Well, how about farming with high levels of productivity, high levels of yield, farming Where? In the United States. Okay. You asked me for models. There are so many models. Estonia, a post-socialist country, is a farming powerhouse. But Cuba, better productivity, total factor productivity, higher yield per hectare. How about farming where people have the freedom to contract labor, to contract capital freely, to trade their goods, to trade their output, where foreigners like me can invest in the farming operations of my own family? That's successful farming. By the way, I could do it here, but not in my own country, not in Cuba. They don't allow me to do it because I live here. Cuba export farming, right? Farming that will allow Cuba to really produce not only for internal consumption. I'm not speaking of autarky. I don't believe in that, but I think Cuba has a lot of potential. And every time I travel to the hinterlands of Cuba, beyond Havana, beyond the hotels and the beaches and all that, I'm marveled by the wasted potential of the island in terms of farming. So there's a lot of potential, many, many areas, and there are models in the world. Yeah, so thank you for your question. Very good question.
Bueno, no voy a dar una clase de economía política, pero traduciendo lo que es fuerza productiva, en el caso de Cuba es desarrollar todas las reservas internas que tiene un país. Por ejemplo, si tú tienes 201 actividades aprobadas para ejercer de forma privada, ¿cuál es la diferencia de esas 200 personas que pueden ejecutar acciones y no el resto de las actividades? Por ejemplo, la mayor reserva que tiene Cuba son las fuerzas, los recursos humanos altamente preparados. Pero de forma privada tú no puedes ejercer, un arquitecto civil no puede crear su propia compañía y venderle al mismo Estado los planos que necesita y que el Estado le cobre. ¿Por qué todo tiene que ser estatal? Entonces, ahí hay toda una serie de reservas que tú puedes utilizar y sería aumentando la base impositiva del Estado para tener más ingresos. Si yo tengo un negocio privado, un restaurante, y tengo ya suficiente capital, ¿por qué no tener el segundo y le pagaría más impuestos al Estado? Porque ahí entonces entra en el tema ideológico, que es que no haya concentración del ingreso. Entonces ahí hay contradicciones. Quieres resolver un problema económico, pero tienes limitantes políticas. Entonces yo creo que Cuba todavía hay muchas posibilidades en la vida. Se ha demostrado que cuando abres un sector o permites algunas actividades, aparecen las cosas inimaginables. Un impresor privado, personas que ahora venden internet. Y tú dices, ¿pero cómo venden internet? No, porque es que ellos compran internet y la venden después más barata, pero tiene 4 clientes. Y todas las alternativas surgen en la medida que hay una pequeña brecha. Por lo tanto, hay reservas productivas. Tú puedes hacer mucho más con lo que tienes. Y no se hace por un problema de que no hay enriquecimiento, que determinadas actividades no. Y en la práctica, ¿qué está pasando? Se está moviendo las personas que trabajan al Estado para otras actividades que ganan más, pero no tienen la alta calificación. Un ingeniero que se va del Estado y puede trabajar en un negocio privado, en un restaurante. ¿Por qué? Y en el peor de los casos se marchan del país. ¿Y por qué se marchan del país? Porque no ven ubicación en el país, no le da trabajo. Por unirlo con la marchan del país. Cuba tiene una de las tasas de desempleo más bajas del mundo. Es cierto. No es que las personas que se van del trabajo estatal, no piden otro empleo estatal. Entonces las estadísticas que llevan el desempleo son las oficinas municipales, que lo que miden son las personas que van a pedir trabajo. Nadie pide trabajo, porque están encontrando trabajo de forma remunerada, mejor remunerada en otras actividades. Entonces ahí hay todavía un margen que el Estado puede hacerlo. Y todo eran mitos, porque si vamos hace 5 años, nada de lo que se permite se podía hacer. Sin embargo, la economía sigue, el país sigue fuerte, siguen las instituciones. O sea, no se ha producido un resquebrajamiento. ¿Por qué no ampliar? O sea, yo creo que llegó el momento que en vez de decir estas 201 actividades es permitir todo aquel que pueda trabajar de forma privada y el Estado reglamentar la que no quiere. Una lista negativa. Yo no creo que haya maestros quiero que haya un médico privado. Perfecto, esa es la que tú no quieres, pues tú del Estado la puedes hacer. Pero el resto, que haya iniciativas, ¿por qué no hacerla? O sea, ¿por qué tienes que definirla? Desmochador de palmas, abrochador de botones. Quita todo eso, que cada cual saque una licencia de lo que sea capaz de ocurrírsele. Esos son reservas productivas.
So essentially, the answer is the Cubans are highly educated with a sense of innovation. They are eager to start new businesses, and it's a state that constrains their actions. So that has to change to allow more space for the private sector.
Con respecto al racionamiento, sí, había un plan. Lo que pasa es que ya no puedes bajar más lo que se le da. Yo creo que ahí hay un error gravísimo del Estado. Yo no creo que tú tengas que seguir a esta altura de juego distribuyendo homogéneamente a 11 millones de personas las mismas cantidades. Yo creo que si hay un grupo de personas, por lo menos esos 535.000 que reciben altos ingresos, que el Estado sabe quiénes son porque pagan impuestos, ¿por qué el Estado tendría que a ellos repartirle lo que le ha subsidiado a aquellas personas de más de 80 años que no pueden trabajar? Entonces, yo creo que hay que pasar de una política generalizada a una política focalizada. Yo creo que Estados Unidos es un ejemplo, una de las economías más grandes del mundo y tiene los food stamps. ¿Por qué los tiene? Porque ha determinado que hay algunas personas que necesitan que le haya una ayuda, porque en Cuba no es encontrar esas personas y no subsidiar a todo el mundo en forma general. Y eso se empezó a disminuir. Ya creo que quedan muy pocos productos en el racionamiento, pero sí había un plan. Y con respecto a la dualidad monetaria, yo creo que es una pregunta que hay que contestarla más larga. No la voy a contestar ahora. Yo creo que más que hayan dos monedas en Cuba, lo que en Cuba hay un problema con dos tasas de cambio. La empresa cubana trabaja con la tasa de cambio de 1 a 1 y las personas trabajan de 1 a 24. Yo creo que el Estado perdió la oportunidad de devaluar de 1 a 24, 1 a 22 y haber medido el efecto de ese 1 a 22. Se ha quedado mucho tiempo sin hacer nada diciendo aquellas personas, pero han pasado 8 años y no se ha avanzado en la dualidad monetaria. Y es el tema más complicado para resolverlo. Pero si no resuelves la dualidad monetaria, la economía tú no sabes si es competitivo o no eres competitiva. Porque son dos monedas las que están. Y realmente eso es una dificultad que ha pasado.
So monetary dualism is a complex problem. It has no easy answers. There are really two exchange rates, right? In 1-to-1 and 24-to-1. And it's just very hard to reconcile them for technical reasons. So we'll have to decide another session to discuss those issues.
I was going to say also that the exchange rate the exchange rate regimes that prevail in Cuba render the peso and the Cuban peso not fungible internationally. So it's an internal exchange regime. It creates a series of distortions. I know, Omar, you have written about those distortions. So just one comment con el rationing. So rationing obviously has been in the decline, and there was a plan announced to do this. And there are many proposals from Omar and other Cuban economists about, which is a better way to deal with subsidies or eliminate or phase out rationing. And there you have also, here in the United States, we have you mentioned that we have the food stamps. And so there are many ways to handle that. That's not as complicated as the monetary issue.
To start the last round of questions. One is, if Fidel and the conservatives were the main impediment to faster reforms, as was thought, and Raúl was a champion of reforms and expected to happen, and many of you younger economists were eager to be part of that process. Just what is it that is, sorry about that, what is it that is blocking the reform process? Is it that Raúl is unable to control the forces opposing reforms? Is it something else, new from the bureaucracy, as you pointed out? What is it that is really blocking the reform process? It seems to me that what you sketched, the agenda you sketched, is so huge, nothing much is going to happen this year. So that Raúl may be going out in 2018 with no major changes in Cuba. If that is the case, where will the political capital be in Cuba to implement changes beyond in a post-Raúl world? So that's a question. It's a challenging question. You don't have to answer it. You can evade it if you wish. But here, that's my question.
Yeah, thank you for this timely and very informative discussion. And I also want to thank my professor Vinoli from the New School for inviting us to this forum. So my question is, are there any provisions under the recent Cuban policy to encourage diaspora Cubans to help with sustainable economic development in Cuba? And if not, why not?
Siguiendo con el tema de la economía post-castrista, ¿qué porcentaje de la economía está controlado por corporaciones militares? ¿Y cuál es la implicación de eso para el futuro?
Si puede hablar del tema del Marabú y el potencial que tiene para fungir como carbón, y si eso es tema o si no es tema.
Tengo entendido que la parte hotelera de las empresas Trump están interesados de crear un resorte turístico en Cuba. Y creo que no es chiste. Y si esa sea la verdad, ¿cuál sería la respuesta del gobierno de Cuba y cuál debiera ser la respuesta?
Bueno, son varias preguntas. Yo creo que con respecto al capital humano hay una contradicción. Es decir, lo podemos ver por varias aristas. Primero, por las exportaciones que hace el país. Las exportaciones que hace el país no necesariamente tienen en cuenta ese valor humano que el país necesita, que tiene, ¿no? Solamente en el caso de las vacunas, la biotecnología es donde se ve realmente ese alto valor humano. Entonces, sigue graduando cada vez más personas en ingeniería, en informática. Sin embargo, después en la composición de las exportaciones no hay software. Entonces, ahí hay una contradicción. Y al Estado no poder aumentar el salario, y no puede aumentar el salario porque tiene déficit fiscal y tiene toda una serie de situaciones, si no se produce más, hay un ciclo vicioso. Al no pagarle al personal calificado lo que ellos aspiran a ganar, se mueven al sector privado que sí le está pagando al menos más que el Estado. Pero hay una descalificación. O sea, tienes que esperar 5 años para hacerte biólogo, para que después trabajes en un restaurante privado. Yo creo que ahí hay una pérdida de recursos por parte del Estado, que es difícil, hay que buscarle solución, porque, como decía al principio, en el peor de los casos, emigran hacia otras economías para ser biólogos. Entonces, ¿para qué ha formado durante 25 años un biólogo para que después no trabaje en la biología cubana? Entonces, son el tema de las contradicciones. Mira, yo no puedo decirte qué % de la economía está en manos de los militares. Yo sí te podría decir que hay actividades donde algunas empresas que pertenecen a GAESA tienen mayoría. En el caso de turismo, hoy Gaviotas es el grupo hotelero más grande de Cuba y pertenece al grupo GAESA. Sí te podría decir que la mayor parte de los hoteles construidos en la Caballería Norte, todos son con Gaviotas, que es una empresa de... Yo sí te diría que una de las cadenas más grandes de recuperación de divisas, las TRD, son de GAESA. Y CIME pertenece a GAESA. Abaguanet pasó a ser administrada por GAESA. Es decir, en el área de comercio y turismo, ellos tienen un predominio importante, pero no en el resto de las industrias. O sea, en la industria sólida, en las grandes empresas petroleras, ellos no tienen presencia. Se mueven en esa área, en lo que es comercio minorista y lo que es turismo. Pero no hay un % en la economía que yo te pueda dar. Mira, las deficiencias regionales están en Cuba hace mucho tiempo. Yo te podría decir, como dice una amiga mía, que hay zonas luminosas y zonas opacas. El país, la costa norte, es una zona luminosa porque está relacionada con el desarrollo del turismo. Y hoy, hace 15 años, Morón, nadie sabía qué era Morón. Hoy Morón es una ciudad que se desarrolla porque tiene la callería Cayo Coco y Cayo Guillermo que pasa por ahí. Por lo tanto, se ha reanimado esa zona por estar vinculada con el turismo. Trinidad pasa lo mismo, Viñales pasa lo mismo. O sea, han aparecido toda una serie de ciudades que se están reanimando con respecto al turismo. Sin embargo, si no hay desarrollo de turismo, que es una de las variables más importantes, en la costa sur los resultados no son los esperados. Sin embargo, Cienfuegos se va a desarrollar también costa sur con el desarrollo del turismo relacionado con los cruceros. Entonces, empiezan a aparecer polos que están relacionados con el turismo o con el polo petroquímico, que es en el caso de Cienfuegos también. Pero hay zonas que se han quedado fuera del desarrollo, o sea, de las variables que están marcando el desarrollo futuro. Yo creo que eso hay que trabajar en eso. Y un ejemplo de eso es volver a recuperar la industria azucarera, que llegaba a muchas más ciudades del país, y yo creo que fue un error haber disminuido la producción de azúcar a la mitad con la demanda de azúcar que hay a nivel mundial y los precios que después se incrementaron. Yo creo que no hay contradicción desarrollar el turismo y desarrollar el azúcar. Y yo creo que en esa vía se va, de acuerdo al programa hasta el 2030, una de las líneas estratégicas que tiene Cuba es desarrollar el complejo agrícola azucarero. Y ahí se reanimarán otros pedazos del país. Pero hay zonas que realmente no tienen nada y no se prevé que tengan nada.
Mario, Omar said that the military control, he doesn't know what percent, but CAESA, which is controlled by the colonels and generals and captains, controls tourism and the central Havana hotels and in the Callerías and a few other sectors in tourism mostly, right? And commerce and trade and commercial activities. And then the rest is really not the militaries, it's just the state enterprises, and then, of course, the private operators. And in regard to the issue of
you want to
the sugar, the land territorial differentiations, there are differentiations, the areas of tourism in various parts of the island. There's a plan now to recover. I cannot, by my comment, I'm very skeptical. But in any case, to recover the sugar sector, which was to enter into a stagnation and crisis, major collapse. And that may generate new patterns of development throughout the land, throughout the country. But right now, it is uneven. And by the way, we have a project. We will be working on a book, hopefully, Omar and I and others, to address those issues in next year. Mario, you want to look on this?
Yeah, so the two questions that I assume they were addressed to me. Well, one, the one about diaspora's involvement in the Cuban economy. So there are two ways to look at it. There's a formal involvement and informal. The formal, the Cuban foreign investment laws indicates that as a Cuban residing abroad, cubano residente en el exterior, which is what I am, although I'm an American citizen, thank God, okay, I could apply to be considered. I could apply to invest in Cuba. I could do some paperwork and apply to invest in Cuba. That would be considered on a case-by-case basis. That's all it says. That's all I read so far. There may be something else there. I'm not aware, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not aware of a massive influx in that way. But what I'm aware is that the changes implemented in the U.S. from 2009 all the way till the present, that hasn't changed, by the way. People think it has changed, but it hasn't changed, have really facilitated informal remittances. And here are some numbers. Around $1 billion a year. These are the numbers that I've seen floating around, even published by the World Bank. They estimate 40% of that goes into business formation. So that's around 400,000, 400,000 or 400 million a year. So they go into the transport sector, the food sector, the private restaurants, the paladares, the hostels, the hoteles, and all that. But let me make a final point about that. When I talk to people here that are considering investing in Cuba, they're concerned about the risk and the fact that they're not clearly defined property rights, okay? And so, for example, even if I wanted to buy a portion of my own family's farm, I cannot do that. I mean, I could do it under the table, but legally, I will have no title over the land. Cuba doesn't recognize that. So to me, that's a high-risk investment. I'd rather buy something maybe in Florida for now, unless they change. So the changes, I think, have been made on the American side, but not as much on the Cuban side. And it has to do with the reform of the Constitution, another aspect of it that I think Omar mentioned before. So Marabú, and the big story is the Marabú that's being exported for charcoal, carbón, for cooking charcoal in the United States. And there's a company, you can go online and do an order, and it's $50 a bag and all those wonderful things. right? Wonderful. But here's what we know. Around 850,000 hectares that have been delivered to usufruct farmers in Cuba are covered with marabou. It's extremely expensive to get rid of it, and even if you want to cut it down to convert it into charcoal, it's very costly, very hard. I'm one of maybe the few people in this room that have touched and seen a marabou plant, and it's ugly, and it's got thorns, and the thorns are brutal, and it's just unbelievable. I cannot even describe it. So what is the market potential to export charcoal to the United States? Very little, right? I don't see many people lining up and saying, let me open a bistro and I'm going to tell my clients that they're going to pay a premium because we're using Cuban marabou. Maybe in New York City. This place is an outlier. This place is, maybe here. Okay. Mario. One final point, please. Only the state retains a monopoly on the export of the marabou that's been talked about in the media. I'm not aware of any private individuals who are selling marabou. Maybe they sell it to the state, right? But my goodness, what a pipe dream that is, So that's all I can tell you, really. But thank you for bringing it up.
Omar and Mario, you did not answer my question, but let me rephrase it as a last set of comments. One is, are you optimistic or pessimistic that in the next 2 years, Cuba will be able to face the possibilities and the challenges to move forward? Or will Cuba enter into a period of crisis?
En la vida es mejor ser optimista, porque con pesimista no vas a avanzar. Yo creo que Cuba tiene todas las posibilidades para avanzar cada vez más y lo ha demostrado en algunos momentos. Yo lo que sí creo que el tiempo es importante y parece que hay varios tiempos. Para mí es uno y para los que dirigen Cuba es otro. Yo creo que hay que acelerar más lo que ha avanzado porque uno no puede estar toda la vida pensando que va a estar mejor después. El tiempo es importante y la vida útil de una persona tiene que ver los resultados. Y yo creo que el optimismo está en que realmente se van a producir o se tienen que producir en los próximos años cambios importantes. Cambios importantes porque todavía está la generación actual en el poder y yo creo que en la medida que pase el tiempo tienen que crearse todas las estructuras para que realmente el país avance mucho más. Y yo creo que están las condiciones creadas para eso. Por lo tanto, yo me siento optimista y yo creo que las cosas están ahí, hay que cambiar.
Omar says that he's an optimist and that you have to be an optimist. The conditions do exist in Cuba for progress, for change, but that they have to be really accelerated.
So I'm cautiously optimistic in the sense that the population challenges that Cuba faces are significant. I think that Omar mentioned it, and I talked about it to a lesser extent. The emphasis on tourism has created a structure that is highly dependent on the external sector. I have no dreams that Cuba will become less dependent, but I think there are other sectors of the Cuban economy that are sort of neglected in the interest of promoting tourism, agriculture being one, construction, housing, and so on. So if I look at the housing stock of Cuba, I'm not very optimistic under the current conditions. But that's just one microscope, right? So I will conclude by saying that I'm optimistic in the sense, cautiously, in the sense that, when I talk to entrepreneurs or cuentapropistas, really, not empresarios or anything, but very small business owners, they understand my favorite financial statement, which is the profit and loss statement. So with that, I will say that I'm optimistic